Welcome to the Binge Eating to Food Freedom podcast for driven hearts and minds. If you pour your best self into everything you do, and yet food takes up so much energy that it pulls you away from what matters most, you're in the right place. I'm Katie Papo, and I'm here to help you create a healthy relationship with food that supports you to live your highest and best life. And for an extra edge, become a Food Freedom Insider. Each week, I'll give you free, practical wisdom you can actually use in your daily life and more. Just head to katiepapo.com/resources or check the show notes. Without further ado, let's dive into the episode.
Welcome to today's topic, which is how to make any food untriggering. So let's start with a story. Once upon a time, there was a man. This man loved to take walks in the forest. But there was a big problem. That every time he would take a step in the forest, he would step on thorns and sharp rocks and sharp little bushes, little pine cones, and he was always picking sharp things out of his feet. So one day he came up with a solution. That with every step he'd place down a leather strip, or let's call it a vegan leather strip. He'd place down a vegan leather strip, and then he'd put his foot down. And that helped protect his feet. So with every step, he would place a strip, and then another strip, and then another strip, before he would take a step. But after some time, he felt tired because he would walk all day and not really get anywhere because all of this time he was preoccupied with putting down the next strip, and he really wasn't enjoying his walk anymore. So one day he had this fabulous idea to put on shoes. And once he put on shoes, he could walk freely through the forest without any fear of the thorns in his feet. What is the moral of this story? How does this connect to triggering foods? Instead of walking through life, trying to check if this party will have the cake that you think it will have, or avoiding this aisle of the supermarket, or telling your family member or your partner that they can't keep chips in the house because you can't be trusted, or you'll be triggered, or worrying or having anxiety that with every step you take, that you'll be tempted. The moral of the story is instead of trying to make different foods untriggering or trying to avoid any possible situation where you could be triggered, the most sustainable thing that you can do to have peace and ease in your life is to make yourself untriggerable. This is like putting on shoes to walk through the woods so you don't have to worry about every single step. When you just put on your proper protection so you are not triggered, even if the food is there, then you'll be able to walk through the world with peace and ease and actually enjoy the walk. So then the question becomes how? How do I make myself untriggerable when all of this time I felt like if I'm in the presence of certain foods, I'm completely out of control? How can I trust myself around these foods? It's hard to even imagine not being triggered. In fact, I have certain trigger foods, and I can relate to this. I always had different trigger foods depending on what was most available. Sometimes it was cookies. If cookies weren't available, then it was peanut butter. If that wasn't available, then it was crackers or chips. For some of us, it's just food in general. We don't even have particular foods. It's just being around any food is so triggering. So we try not to keep food in the house, or we try not to go to certain social situations. So, how is it possible that somebody with all of these issues and being triggered around food to the point where one bite of it can make us eat the whole box? Even if we are the type of person who is disciplined in many areas of life, who, when we set our mind to something, we can most certainly achieve it. We can train for marathons, we can get promotions, we can graduate with multiple degrees. But somehow 2 cookies is the problem. So I want to talk to you today about why that is and how to change it. How you can actually become the person who forgets that the chips are in the cabinet. And even when you open the cabinet and see them, it doesn't trigger you. Or even if you have a couple chips, it's just a couple chips and you can enjoy them and you can move on. And I need to outline the basics. I do have a program where I give you my exact steps that I've used myself and that I guide every single private client I work with to actually feel these shifts. So there is no compulsion around food. It's just pure calm. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in case you want to go deeper into those steps that I'm going to talk about today. So I want to just start by saying, I know that you are a logical person and that when you get these triggers around food, you know that eating a box of cookies isn't going to help you feel better. So when you get that craving and you get that urge, there is part of you, it's the logical part of you that says, don't do that. You will not actually feel better. How many times have you done this before and you only feel guilt, you only feel shame, you only feel pain? This is against your goals. You're trying to be healthy or lose weight. This is not in line with your goals. Don't do that. There is that part of you that says that, and yet you still do it. So off the bat, we know that even the most logical, intelligent person can struggle with this issue, which means the issue isn't that you need to logic yourself more or research more about nutrition and that processed foods are bad for you. I used to try to scare myself and read all about the horrible things that could happen to me health-wise if I kept eating sugar. I used to Google what would happen if I kept overeating and all of the damage it could do to my digestive system and how this could shorten my lifespan and how this could get me landed in the hospital and all of the things that I could potentially lose if I kept eating this way. I used to try to think about these things and write them down just to scare myself enough to stop. But it never worked. In fact, oftentimes I would have those thoughts and I'd get so scared and I'd say, by tomorrow, I cannot be eating like this anymore. So that very night, anticipating not being able to eat like this tomorrow, I would have a huge binge. So here I was scaring myself that I was harming myself, and yet I'm binging hours later. So this is how illogical this is. And I do consider myself to be an intelligent person who wants the best for myself and my health. So why was this happening to me? So I want to just start with a story, non-food. You might have heard me tell this before, but I want to use it today to illustrate how you can make this shift for yourself to be untriggerable around food. So I have a friend, let's call her Lisa, also a very logical, intellectual person, had a great career in the corporate world in New York City. And one day she noticed that she had a phobia of snakes. And the way that she really came to see how destructive this phobia was it was her, I think, final year of college. And she took an exam. Normally, she was very high achieving in college, got fabulous grades. And on the very back of the exam, there was a cartoon snake drawing, like a little comic strip. And when she saw it, she started to have a panic attack so bad that she could not think. Her brain simply could not process information. She actually had to leave the room and was not able to even finish her test. So as she went through her life, she lived in New York City, so not many snakes around. But if a cartoon was triggering for her, there were other little things that were triggering for her too. For example, if someone just said the word snake, she would start to panic. So all of her friends, myself included, knew not to say the word snake around her. But then it started getting worse. She started fearing that if she turned on the TV, there would be a show where there could be an image of a snake, or a movie like Harry Potter, right? There is a snake. And so she started not being able to watch TV or movies without having intense anxiety that there could be a situation where a snake would come up. So she decided to work on this because she realized that she had two options. Number one, she could address the internal reaction that was going on. She knew the snakes were not the issue. She knew logically that a cartoon or a picture of a snake or someone saying the word snake had no real meaning behind it, that all of the issues she was experiencing was her nervous system's response where she would go into panic. So she knew if she could manage her internal reactions, then she could have peace. She did have the other option to just continue living this way, hoping for the best, but still living in fear constantly that anytime she would do anything, as harmless as watching TV, that she would be sent into a panic attack. So even though she technically had two options, she really only saw the one because she's the kind of person who really values her life, sees her life as priceless, sees her potential as priceless, and she was not about to be bogged down in her beautiful life by fear and triggers. So she started working on her nervous system. She would put herself in situations where she would be triggered more minorly, and she would work on managing her nervous system and her emotional reaction, her behavioral reaction. So she started with just little cartoon pictures of snakes, then went to photos of snakes, until eventually, when she was able to manage her reaction and not have these panicked reactions, she could do like a snake behind glass. I think that was the final test that she gave herself. Years later, now she lives in upstate New York in the mountains where there are pretty much snakes everywhere. And she's able to move through her life freely without fear. So what does this have to do with you and food? I wanted to demonstrate how it's not the snake, it's not the food that is the problem. The food itself is not the problem. The cookies themselves are not anxiety inducing. It's your reaction to them. I told a story about how if someone sees a rose, like a rose bush outside, if there's somebody who had a really great experience throughout their life with roses, such as someone who gets roses on Valentine's Day from their loved one, they might look at that rose bush and immediately feel amazing and feel so happy and so good. Whereas somebody else might look at that rose bush and, let's say when they were a kid, they grabbed a rose and then they got a fistful of thorns and then their hands started bleeding, and that was the first time they ever were bleeding. They might have a more traumatized response to roses, and they might kind of freeze up or have a little moment of fear. And so I explained how the rose is the neutral object and our reaction is the piece that we actually need to work on if we want real freedom. That we're not going to get the kind of freedom and peace that we want if we just try to avoid roses or snakes or food our whole life. And then one woman asked me, she said, but food is so different than any other example because there's so much emotion attached to it over the course of so many years. Like cookies represent this warm, fuzzy feeling for me, but I also can't trust myself around cookies. So there's this conflicting feelings that makes it so triggering and emotional. So cookies are a real trigger. Now, this person believed that she was pointing out a different point than the one that I was making. But really, she was just proving my point. Because it's like she said, the cookies seem so much harder and so much more different than a rose or a snake for her because there's so much emotion attached to them. But really, is the emotion literally attached to the cookies? All of that emotion, all of that response is not happening within the cookies. If it was, then any person who experienced those cookies would have the same reaction. That alone is the proof that all of this reaction is happening within you, and it's your nervous system's automatic response. It's your autopilot, subconscious response that goes beyond logic. You hear me talk about how willpower is not the answer. It goes beyond willpower, because even though I was telling myself all of the dangerous ways that binge eating and eating all that sugar would hurt me, even though I was logical and smart and knew it was bad for me, I would still eat it in huge quantities. So the cookies might be the thing that when you see them, it triggers that reaction within you. But when we just focus on, well, I need to find a new diet that doesn't include sugar, right? We're not actually fixing the problem. Ultimately, if we want to make real changes that last, we need to focus on the response that is happening within you, the subconscious response that happens generated by your nervous system automatically. That's what needs to be changed. The more you're just running around from diet to diet, thinking that that's going to help, setting more food rules that are stricter for yourself, making more promises that you won't eat those things, you're just going to be running in circles. And some people do this for years. But if that's you and you want to make the change, diving into your nervous system's automatic responses and rewiring that's the work that will change everything. Now, this is probably one of the biggest things that I teach. When a new private client signs on to work with me, this is what we start working on day one. That's how important this is. I don't let even one day go by without beginning this training. My clients are training this into their systems really well, because we can't rely, even though we're smart and we're logical and intelligent people, we can't just rely on the conscious knowledge that, oh, this food is bad, so if I know that it's bad, then I won't want it. Or if I avoid it, then I won't think about it. I have a client right now who she says she was in a series of relationships where she would live with her partner, because if she had a healthy partner, then it was easier for her, because then all of these unhealthy foods wouldn't be in the house. But then, of course, if she's without a partner, it's not like the problem then went away. It was just hidden for a temporary time. The problem was still there. Nothing within her really changed, just the external situation changed. So here's how I train my clients so what's within them changes, and then they don't have to worry about what kind of situation they're in or what kind of food is around, because they themselves can feel at peace and ease in any situation with food. From a strategic standpoint, I call this double strong. And by that I mean I always have my clients train their automatic responses, their unconscious responses, in both a formal manner and an integrated manner. So what does that mean? So think about how in the Army, even when there's not a war going on, where people are running to the battlefield, what do the troops do? They train. They don't just wait around doing nothing, because then if an emergency happens, then they won't have any idea of what to do and they'll just panic. And that would be a terrible army and terrible protection for the country that they're protecting. So if you truly want to protect yourself, you need to train when things are fine. You need to train when things are easy, and practice using your tools during times when you are not triggered. When you're not super stressed or feeling super compulsive, there are ways to train your nervous system in a very intentional way, and I would call this more formal training. But this formal training isn't enough, because most people don't live in a bubble with perfect circumstances, which is why a lot of the time actually dieting fails, because it's great if you always have access to every single supplement you need and every kind of food that you need for the diet. But what about when you go on vacation? Or what about if you get sick? Or what about if you're really busy taking care of somebody else? There's another kind of practice beyond the formal training that I call integrated practice. And this is where you start integrating the tools. And we use a variety of different tools to train the nervous system. This is what's in the course, where you practice integrating your tools in your everyday life. And that way, when a more emergency style situation comes, like a craving or a decision you need to make as you're passing a fast food restaurant on your way home, then you can practice integrating your tools in that kind of particular situation. So if you really want to start training your body, your brain, and I'm sure you hear me talk about that a lot, because your body and your mind are connected. So unless you start training the subconscious, you're not really going to reach the conscious in any kind of sustainable way. And that's why, like, when you've built habits through dieting or a weight loss program or something like that, and you've been in a good routine and you're like, oh yeah, this is working for me, this feels really good. The reason why you always fall off the wagon and why it doesn't stick is because your subconscious is not aligned with those conscious behaviors. When your subconscious is aligned and your nervous system is aligned with those behaviors, that's when it sticks. So that's why I always start with my clients from the inside out. Because when the inside changes, the outside naturally changes. If you are not internally triggered, if your automatic nervous system response isn't to be triggered by Oreos, like Oreos were mine, that's why I'm saying Oreos, then you can be around Oreos, just like any quote unquote normal eater, and not really have a reaction. Even if you eat one, it's not going to trigger you to keep eating all of them. We can blame it on processed foods and they're highly palatable, but there are plenty of people in this world who can have 2 Oreos and be happy. So we know it can't just be that the Oreos taste good, right? There is something within us that can be worked on. So maybe we could still enjoy Oreos, but it's not going to trigger us to eat the whole box. So if you really want to train to make yourself untriggerable and calm your nervous system down around food, so that way you can experience peace and ease around any food, and ultimately this helps to end binge eating. This is one of the first steps, at least one of the first steps that I do with my clients to completely transform and heal their relationship with food. I recommend a combination of formal training and integrated training. I don't recommend hoping that this will just one day go away. I don't recommend trying yet another diet. I don't recommend going to therapy and talking for weeks and years about childhood traumas and the reasons why you turn to food for comfort. That might give you some awareness, but it's not going to actually change the habits. I don't recommend just trying to use willpower every day and writing in your journal that you promise tomorrow will be different. I used to do that, and I actually just found an old journal where I was writing that almost every day. So what's beautiful about when you start to train within and you start doing this inner work, and it's the most inner work because it's the things that we're not even aware of right now. It's the subconscious things that are happening right when the craving happens. But even though it's deep, it doesn't actually have to take long. The majority of people who I work with start to feel a shift within their very first day. And that actually brings me, I told you I would let you know about the course that's going to be coming out. It's not out now, but you can still purchase it. And then you'll be the first to get it when it starts in January, where you actually learn all these tools in depth and learn how to apply them in a formal way, in an integrated practice way, like I'm talking about. So let me just take a moment to go into that if you're ready to start making these shifts yourself in your new year. The program is called Feel the Shift. And the reason I named it Feel the Shift is because you will actually feel the shift from compulsion to calm around food. And the likelihood is you will feel it in your first 24 hours as soon as you start applying these tools. Now, the tools are much deeper than what I can go into on the podcast, because you're actually going to need to train in these. So I will teach you as you go how you use them and how to apply them. I wanted to create something for you that goes much deeper than theory and basic understanding, where you can have a purely practical approach, where if you're the kind of person who can just show up and follow instructions and execute, this is going to be a great course for you, because you'll be able to just follow the practical steps. And I'll teach you how to train formally. Like I said, there's 2 ways to train. There's the formal training, where you start to just wire this into your nervous system. And then there's the integrated training. So you'll learn how to apply this in different situations throughout your day, whether it's driving past a fast food restaurant, or going in the grocery store and passing the cookie aisle, or going to a wedding where cake is being served, or even having a trigger food in the house, or if you have a craving for a binge. So what I'm including is actual practical, structured protocols for, first of all, feeling the shift in your nervous system. So you go from compulsive to calm. Then this is the exact one I use for my private clients around trigger foods. So you'll actually learn to train yourself around trigger foods. So that way those foods that are currently triggering you become less triggering until they're not triggering at all. And you'll also have a complete action plan for binges. So that way you start to break it down from all the different sides. Because I can't go into this now because there's just not enough time, but maybe actually for another episode, maybe next week I'll do anatomy of a binge. We'll see. But there's all these different pieces of a binge, right? There's what's happening before we even have the urge, the things that are happening underneath the surface. Then what happens when we have the urge, then what happens moments before, then what happens when we're already binging, and then what happens after a binge that can actually trigger the next one, even if the next one is the next day or the next week. There's all these different pieces to break down that can start to end the binge cycle, and I'll give you the detailed plan on how to complete that. And then I'll also finally, as if that's not a ton already, I will also give you a framework that I teach my clients too on how to deal with intrusive food thoughts, like the obsessive food thoughts and the constant mental chatter around food. And this is just an introductory course, by the way, but we are going through a lot. And that's why I said this is the deepest kind of introductory course, and you'll get to keep all of it, so you can refer back to it for as long as you'd like. But I'll also give you like a 10-day map, so you'll be able to guide yourself through all of this in a 10-day span. You'll be able to feel the shift in your first 24 hours, but to go through everything and to be able to apply this in all the different kinds of situations that can come up over the course of 10 days, you'll have that 10-day plan to work on. I have all this information on my website. If you go to katiepapo.com/programs, you'll see the program called Feel the Shift, and you can open it up and read all the details. Right now, just for when I open the program, this is only a one-time thing I'm offering. Beyond this, it'll be a self-study program. But for the first launch, because I'm so excited about this, I also wanted to be there for you to guide you through this process and actually answer your questions personally as you're going through this process. So I'm offering an advanced coaching intensive where I'll be able to communicate with you directly. And if you have any questions as you're practicing these tools in your life, I will be there to help. And we'll have group coaching calls where you'll be able to ask your questions. And we'll also have, in between those calls, opportunities for you to ask your questions as well. And I'll be able to support you. So this is called Feel the Shift. You can go to my website at katiepapo.com/program. I recommend saving your spot now. And then you'll see the dates in the information packet, and you can mark on your calendar when we'll actually start the program in the new year. And what I always find now, especially entering into a new year, that it's really great to be on the side of things where you're entering the year in a more relaxed way. There's going to be a lot of people who are just joining ridiculously unsustainable programs last minute, running around like their heads cut off and feeling really stressed and feeling a ton of pressure because they've set all these habits that they want to have, but they don't have the sustainable subconscious patterns underneath. And they're going to fall off the wagon probably by February. So to avoid being in that group of people, I recommend entering the new year. And this is what I do now. I enter the new year still with goals and ambitions, for sure, but in a relaxed way and with a plan how I can go at this sustainably. So that way this year really can be the year that you achieve this. So this is the perfect first steps to really make your relationship with food a heck of a lot more peaceful, less compulsive, and to really see how in a structured, practical way you can start applying this into any situation in your life with food. So you can go to katiepapo.com/programs and click on Feel the Shift in order to learn more. If you do join during this first round, I also look forward to answering your questions personally, and I'm really excited for this event. So with that, I'm going to give you a summary of what we talked about today. So number one, instead of trying to make all these different foods untriggering or trying to avoid them, the most sustainable thing that you can do is make yourself untriggerable. Number two, the problem is not the cookies. They are just the trigger that lights up your automatic nervous system response, your subconscious automatic response that creates all of the out of control behaviors that follow. And number three, this is actually good news because while you can't change how many cookies there are in the world, you can change the way that you automatically react to something. Number four, how do we do this? While there are more intricacies with the kinds of tools and how to apply them that are deeper than what I can go into in the podcast, it's really important to know that it's necessary to have a combination of formal training and the practical integration in order to best rewire the nervous system so you're no longer compulsive around food and you feel calm, just like how Lisa did with the snakes. But we see food a lot more than we see snakes. So it's important to go into this with a plan and not just hope for the best or pray that one day all this will go away. If we go into a plan and with structure, then we actually can set ourselves up for success. I hope that this episode gave you some light bulbs into how you can start to make your relationship with food less compulsive, more calm, and no longer triggering. And I look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you for spending time with me today. If you're ready to take the next step in your journey, become a food freedom insider at katiepapo.com/resources. You'll get free practical guidance and instant access to my foundations class. That's katiepapo.com/resources. New podcast episodes come out every week, so subscribe to the podcast now. And if this episode resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you'd take a moment to leave a kind review. It's very meaningful to me, and it helps other people find freedom too. I appreciate you so much, and I hope to help you further on your journey. Until next time, be gentle with yourself and others. See you next week.